incel, QAnon, 4chan, Snyder cut motherfuckers want to get on a line now?
I usually cover directors I really admire with these ranking videos, but this week I thought it would be interesting to look at a filmmaker I'm a bit more lukewarm on, Mr. Zack Snyder. There are three kinds of people in this world. People who don't know who Zack Snyder is, people who do know who Zack Snyder is but think his films are kinda meh, and people who think Zack Snyder is some kind of cinematic messiah whose films are sacred religious texts and whose critics have simply misunderstood his genius. I actually love Zack Snyder as a guy. I listen to any podcast he's on because his passion and enthusiasm for filmmaking are really infectious, and he seems like a genuinely good dude. His actual films, on the other hand, I'm less enthralled by. Snyder works best when he just focuses on cool visuals and action sequences, like in 300. He's less successful when he aims a bit higher and tries to turn a superhero movie or a zombie heist movie into a lofty, philosophical 3-hour epic. I won't rank the theatrical cut of Justice League since that's not really Zack's movie, and I'll just rank Rebel Moon as 2 movies. I'm not ranking Rebel Moon as 4 fucking movies, even if it was released that way.
Who among you is willing to die for what you believe?
Rebel Moon finds Snyder at his absolute worst, being given a blank check and full creative control and having absolutely nothing to say. Rebel Moon just crams together all of Snyder's favourite parts of Star Wars, Dune, Warhammer and heavy metal for a completely hollow hodgepodge of sci-fi cliches. The first volume of this insufferable shit show dedicates more than 2 hours to getting the band together. They go from planet to planet, picking up stoic badasses to help them fight the Empire, and after they've collected 3 or 4 of the same sort of character, it starts to feel painfully repetitive. It's like watching a hyperactive 10-year-old play with action figures and waiting for him to get to some kind of a point. Sucker Punch isn't as boring as Rebel Moon, but it is a really bad film. The script starts off with an interesting premise about using fantasy worlds to escape from a harrowing reality, but it doesn't have a compelling story to tie it all together. It's just an anthology of random tropes and visual styles that Snyder felt like playing with. Cinematographer Larry Fong brought stunning imagery to the proceedings, but that's not enough to save this mess. Sucker Punch dips its toes into various exciting genre sandboxes, but the characters are too thinly drawn to carry the movie. I enjoyed Rebel Moon 2 marginally more than I enjoyed Rebel Moon 1 because it finally gets to the long-promised battle and delivers some cool action scenes, but it's still pretty shit. The screenwriting is so lazy that there's literally a scene where everyone goes around a table and explains their own backstory. The battle scenes are admittedly pretty entertaining, but there's no strategy to them whatsoever. The good guys and the bad guys just run at each other in a field of wheat. And you're still given absolutely no reason to care about the characters, so when they start getting killed off, you won't feel a thing.
You too can be a great guardian one day.
Legend of the Guardians, the Owls of Ga'Hoole.
I was genuinely intrigued when Snyder decided to follow up Watchmen with a kid's cartoon, but Legend of the Guardians ended up being a pretty lame movie. As it turns out, when Snyder doesn't have sex and violence to rely on, his films can be pretty boring. Still, it's a pretty sweet story about good-natured owls banding together to escape from evil owls, and the animation is gorgeous.
She with you?
I thought she was with you.
There are certain parts of Batman v Superman that I really love. The opening scene of people fleeing from the destruction of Metropolis while Bruce Wayne runs into the rubble to see who he can save perfectly encapsulates who that character is. Ben Affleck captures the rage simmering under the surface more effectively than most other Batman actors. And while I don't agree with Snyder's decision to make Batman a murderous maniac, that warehouse scene is one of the best action sequences in any Batman movie. But there's also a lot of things in BVS that I hate. I hate that it turns Lex Luthor into a budget Joker. I hate that it does the Death of Superman storyline in just the second film. I hate that a jar of piss is a major plot point. And the Save Martha scene is just fucking stupid. Zack Snyder's Justice League was definitely an improvement on the Joss Whedon theatrical cut, but that's really not saying much. I'm glad Snyder got to complete his vision, but he went way overboard with it. He went from having too little creative control over the theatrical cut to having too much creative control over the director's cut. Making it over 4 hours long and cramming it into Academy ratio was just indulgent and pretentious, and led to some really awkward cropping. Still, I'll take the bloated yet singular vision of a self-satisfied madman over the factory line corporate product that is the theatrical cut. Army of the Dead has the perfect premise for a pulpy 90-minute escape from New York style sci-fi actioner, but Snyder tries to execute it as an experimental 2.5-hour humanist drama, and the result is a tedious slog. The longer it drags out its dumbass plot, the less it makes sense, and it's full of needlessly complicated zombie lore involving zombie robots, zombie tribalism, and a zombie hive mind. Still, the opening montage is great, the actors are all great, it has a wonderfully dark sense of humor, and the scene where a guy gets mauled by a zombie tiger is one of the greatest things I've ever seen. I prefer my Superman bright and colourful. I'm not a fan of the miserable, brooding Superman introduced in Man of Steel, and I fundamentally disagree with the choice to make Superman a killer, especially when he has plenty of other powers he could have used to defeat Zod. Having said that, it was a really interesting approach to retell Superman's origin story as a philosophical, Terrence Malick-style art house epic. Jonathan Kent's totally avoidable death notwithstanding, Man of Steel pulls off that premise pretty well in its first 2 acts. The third act devolves into mindless mayhem, but on the whole, Man of Steel is one of Snyder's strongest movies.
This is madness!
Madness.
This is Sparta!
300 is a classic case of style over substance, but the style is really cool. It has all the hallmarks that would go on to become annoyingly overused in Snyder's later films. Super slow motion action, saturated colours, excessively graphic sex and violence, but they work really well here. There's not much to this movie beyond watching shirtless, oiled up bodybuilders killing each other, but that's fucking awesome. Other swords and sandals actioners like Troy and Gladiator had flirted with homoerotic elements, but 300 goes all in with its homoeroticism. It's as bold as it is historically inaccurate.
Unforgettable.
Snyder's film adaptation of Watchmen completely misses the point of the source material. Alan Moore's comic book deconstructs the superhero archetype and suggests that if superheroes were real, they wouldn't be upstanding men of courage like Superman or Captain America. They'd be just as corrupt and self-serving as the most powerful people in the real world. Watchmen is about how we shouldn't glorify superheroes, but trust Snyder to make a Watchmen movie that glorifies the superheroes to an absurd degree. But I still really enjoy this movie. The ensemble cast are incredible, there's a ton of great needle drops on the soundtrack, and Snyder brings Dave Gibbons' illustrations to life spectacularly. Like Orson Welles and Kevin Smith, Zack Snyder is a director who has never topped his first film. Snyder made his feature debut with a remake of George A. Romero's seminal zombie thriller Dawn of the Dead. I wouldn't have thought anyone could make a decent remake of Dawn of the Dead, let alone Zack Snyder, but against all odds, his Dawn of the Dead remake is actually really awesome. Like Watchmen, Snyder's Dawn of the Dead irons out a lot of the satirical intent of the source material, but it has impressive blockbuster scale for a relatively low-budget production, and it ramps up the intensity with 28 Days Later style sprinting zombies. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you liked the video. Remember to like and subscribe and click on the little bell. And also seize the day and call your mom and be kind to yourself.